Right-wing political commentator Megyn Kelly could not stop lying during her conversation with Breakfast Club host and political activist Charlamagne the God, and we have to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. Got another Megyn Kelly one for you. She's good content to be sure. And listen, smart lady, formerly a Fox News host. And at times, she has actually shown some signs of principle. She was a good debate moderator during the presidential debates. She's asked tough questions of Donald Trump in previous interviews. Not sure she'd be prepared to do it now. She occasionally offers some tepid criticism of Trump. Again, shows signs of reasonableness, which makes her much more and increasingly frequent demonstrations of unreasonableness all the more frustrating. She recently interviewed Charlamagne the God. He's the host of The Breakfast Club. He is a progressive political activist. He endorsed President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris in 2020. He's refusing to do so now, even though he has all but indicated time and time again he still intends to vote for them. He's just not going to enthusiastically endorse them. So I'm not sure why, but listen, that's the situation. So she interviews him, much like she recently interviewed Bill Maher. Right, because because both of these people criticize Democrats, and so I think she thinks that she can kind of like move them over to her side, or she can get them to bash on Democrats in a way which will make her feel good. But she lied repeatedly through her teeth and made a number of false equivalences. So we're going to play some of these clips and unpack them together.
You know what's the more interesting conversation for me, and this is I'm glad you brought that up in regard to Trump. Why does nobody ever talk about him being unpatriotic, like not being patriotic? And what I mean by that is, if he says he wants to suspend the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election, or his lawyers were in court and his lawyers were like, well, he never agreed to support the Constitution, or we saw him, attempt to lead an attempted coup of this country. Like, that's just unconstitutional. Like, why does nobody ever say he's not a patriot? Like, why does that discussion never come up? Because when I think about how mad, conservatives seem to get sometimes when they see people, taking a knee, right, at football games, and they call that, not being patriotic. How come nobody ever says, wanting to suspend, the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election? How come nobody ever says that's not patriotic?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no question. I don't know what specific you're referring to, but I've seen Trump Truth Social posts that speak to exactly what you are saying. I don't know about in court, but he's suggested things like that. I'm not going to defend that.
So actually, before we get into Megyn Kelly thing, because again, we're doing this in real time, it's not scripted, so it's possible that I will lose track of what was said. I just want to say this real quick. That was a really good point by Charlamagne the God. I mean, I've had conversations with liberal political streamer Destiny about this, because he says Democrats should reclaim the mantle of patriotism. And what Charlamagne the God is talking about kind of speaks to that, which is, right-wingers, they say they love the Constitution, that they love America, but they constantly support people who denigrate America, right? So when Donald Trump says, let's make America great again, he's saying that America isn't great now. That doesn't, imagine if a progressive said something like that. Conservatives would be flipping tables. Donald Trump routinely insults the United States, U.S. cities, U.S. states, 50% of the country, liberals, progressives, people in blue cities, blue states, women, marginalized groups, minorities, constantly insults these things. And yes, on Truth Social, he called for the termination of the Constitution after President Biden had not only won the election and been inaugurated, but was like a year in office. Trump said, listen, let's kick Biden out and put me back in. Don't even wait for the next election. Just put me back in now. I'll serve the rest of Biden's term. And if we have to terminate the Constitution to do so, let's do it. That's what Charlamagne the God's talking about. He's also talking about Trump's attorneys argued during the Colorado Supreme Court case, right? The notion of kicking Trump off the Colorado ballot, that, hey, the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to Trump because he only took an oath to defend the Constitution, not to support it. Distinction without a difference, but super gross stuff. So anyway, great points by Charlamagne the God. Let's see what Megyn Kelly does with them.
Colorado case, I think.
But here's the thing. So, and I don't defend Trump's behavior after January 6th at all. I don't think he behaved well in any way, shape, or form. But I just think that there are bigger issues. And I think if you're going to talk about actions that are extra constitutional. There are sins, I mean, grave sins on both sides, but especially on Biden's side. You know, the end around he did on the Supreme Court on some of the COVID stuff, on the rent abatement possibilities, on now the student loans that he's not allowed to be doing, but he's trying to find a way to do it anyway, on trying to get Trump off the ballot so that voters can't vote for him, on using the justice system for the first time in almost 250 years to go after a political opponent. All those things, they don't make me say, yay for all the stuff Trump did post January 6th. But they even the playing field for me more, where I'm like, I'm just going to vote on who I think is going to get the country in the best shape.
So this is where, you know, at the end of the day, despite her flashes of reasonableness, Megyn Kelly is just totally captured by the MAGA cult. So in her mind, President Biden finding creative ways to forgive billions of dollars in student debt is worse than Donald Trump conspiring to send fake electors or to foment an insurrection or to pressure the vice president into throwing out votes he doesn't like to install himself as the president of the United States, to break the peaceful transfer of power, which is the single most important civic tradition that we have, the thing that distinguished us at the time of the founding from every other country on earth. That's what's more important. She's lost perspective. A couple of things to point out. Number one, the Supreme Court never said that Biden couldn't cancel student loan debt. They said that the particular mechanisms used at the time, Plan A, that was not within his purview. Nowhere in the decision in which they struck that particular attempt down did they say the president can't wipe out student loan debt for any reason. That's not what's happening. Okay, so Biden halted the plan that went before the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court struck down, and he went with a different plan. That's well within his prerogative. And if Republicans want to challenge Biden's, I think it's the SAVE Act, if I'm not mistaken, they're free to do so. And it's a right-wing court, so they'll probably be successful. But that's not Biden acting unconstitutional. That's Biden exploiting a very obvious loophole. Hey, you say Plan A can't work, but you never say anything about Plans B, C, D, E, and F. And so until those are struck down, I'm free to do what I want. That's just politics. Also, it wasn't Biden who tried to get Trump kicked off the ballot. That was actually Republican voters in states across this country. Had nothing to do with Joe Biden. But this is where Megyn Kelly's mindset goes, it must be Joe Biden. Joe Biden is behind it all. She has no evidence for that. Joe Biden's name wasn't on the lawsuits. It was Republican voters in those various states and state actors at that level. Just all the stuff that it was Biden who is sicking the Justice Department on Trump. No. And by the way, it was Donald Trump every single time Trump was run for office, 2016, 2020, and 2024. It was Trump who campaigned publicly on jailing his political opponents. I didn't hear a peep out of Megyn Kelly about that. So why is it okay for Trump to campaign on these things? And as the sitting president in 2020 tried to do it, he publicly called on Bill Barr to prosecute a political rival, Joe Biden, and a former President Barack Obama a month before the election as the sitting president. Why is it okay for Trump to do that, but it's not okay for Trump to be prosecuted? That's how you know, again, Megyn Kelly is an unprincipled loser on this, because if she was really principled, she would condemn in the strongest possible terms all of Trump's mountains of rhetoric and attempts to jail his political opponents, but she doesn't care about that. So again, all of that is to say Megyn Kelly is, of course, lying through her teeth on this. And with that in mind, I've got another clip to play. We'll unpack it together.
I feel like I'm voting to preserve, democracy, because, I've read Project 25. I don't know how you feel about it, but, Project 25, it's very terrifying to me. And, like I said, we've seen what Donald Trump has attempted to do on January 6th. And, hearing rhetoric like, I want to suspend the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election, that's scary. That's not the kind of America I want to live in.
Well, what do you think about Joe Biden bragging that he's doing ends around the Supreme Court, which is what he just said this week on this so-called student loan forgiveness, which essentially means the truckers listening to us right now are going to have to pay off the student loans of the rich college elites something he was told by the Supreme Court he didn't have the power to do. He's not a king. And he's out there bragging that he's doing ends around them, notwithstanding rulings he's forced to follow. Like, that stuff, too, is extra constitutional. His refusal to enforce the border law, extra constitutional. I mean, he could have been impeached for just what's happening along the southern border alone, not to mention him having classified documents and all the other laws that he has allegedly broken. I look at him and I think he's got no moral high ground.
So again, Megyn Kelly can't help but engage in false equivalence. We addressed the student loan thing. The Supreme Court never said, Mr. President, you don't have the authority to cancel student debt. They said the attempt that you're using, the authority that you're drawing on in this particular case to try to cancel mass swaths of student debt, you don't have. Again, they never said President can't cancel out debt. Never said that. They just said that is not the power that the Supreme Court has. They were referring to a specific set of circumstances and a particular authority. So Biden, again, cleverly using other alternate authorities at his disposal to cancel student loan debt, it's not a problem. Now, if the Supreme Court says you can't do that, and then he continues to do it that way, then maybe she'd have a point, but that hasn't happened. Okay. And then, of course, again, I'm so amused. Biden's not a king. Kings cancel student loan debt. Meanwhile, Trump is arguing that as a president, he is entitled to murder political rivals, that he's entitled to sell nuclear codes to foreign adversaries, and that he's entitled to stage military coups. His lawyers, on his behalf, argued that before the United States Supreme Court. He's the one who wants to be a king, Megyn. Duh. It's not President Biden arguing that he should be able to murder Donald Trump. Donald Trump saying he has a right to murder Joe Biden or his political opponents. Like, that's what I'm saying. To Megyn Kelly, breaking the law with impunity, trying to, stage coups, selling nuclear codes, that's not overstepping your authority. It's canceling student loan debt. She's got this ass backwards. Totally unprincipled, a hypocritical loser. The other thing I'll point out is that Biden is enforcing the laws at the southern border, which is why he's deported more people than Trump and Obama. He's arrested more people than Trump and Obama. I mean, we've seized more drugs at the southern border under Biden than under Trump and Obama. If he weren't enforcing the laws, then none of those things would be happening. So she's just wrong about all that stuff. But again, this is your brain on MAGA. She can't help it. One other clip.
These poor, white voters, that he is for them, but their conditions aren't getting any better either, And
but how can you say that? The economy was much better under Trump. And the voter poll after poll after poll reflects that.
Sure, but it never trickles down to the poor, and I don't even understand why we keep acting like it does. Like it's like you'll see people say the economy is great. Stocks are up. The people I'm talking about don't have no stocks. The people I'm talking about that live in those rural areas in most corners of South Carolina.
So, Megyn Kelly talking about how the economy was better under Trump. Donald Trump. Again, your brain on MAGA. Number one, Donald Trump inherited a good economy from Barack Obama. That's a fact. Most of Trump's economic successes, to the extent he had any, were mere continuations along the same trend lines of stuff that he inherited from Obama. Megyn Kelly wants you to think that time reset when Donald Trump was sworn in on January 20th, 2017, that he created the world's greatest economy from nothing. He inherited nothing good. He inherited nothing. He did it all himself. It's really stupid. He merely continued what Obama, again, I use a metaphor of, because you think about it, Obama, he inherited a mess left for him by a Republican president, George W. Bush, the Great Recession. And so again, use the metaphor of a skyscraper. Barack Obama walks imagine he's an architect or he's some sort of construction manager. There you go. He walks in and there's a crater in the ground, 3 or 4 stories deep. And then he builds a 50-foot high rise, or 50-story high rise, rather. But it's not finished. So he leaves the project. Then construction manager Trump comes along, and he adds an additional 10 stories, makes it a 60-foot high rise at the same rate that Obama created the 50-story high rise. And then, during his last few weeks as construction manager, the whole thing collapses, all of it, all 60 stories, the 10 he created and then the 50 that Obama created, and it's back in the hole left for Obama by George Bush. That's a metaphor of the economy. Obama presided over the recovery of Republican President George W. Bush's Great Recession. After 2 terms, the economy was firing on all cylinders. He handed that economy off to Trump. Trump continued it along for about 3 years. Job numbers actually slowed under Trump compared to Biden. I digress. Then the whole thing collapsed in Trump's 4th year in office because he wasn't president for 3 years. He was president for 4, Megyn. During COVID, that wasn't Biden. That was your guy. And the economy cratered. That's what Joe Biden inherited. Joe Biden inherited Donald Trump's mess. And then if you look at the macroeconomic metrics, the vast majority of them were actually doing better under Biden than Trump. You want to talk about inflation? Well, yes, inflation is high. It's dropping. If you want to say that it was the result of spending, well, Donald Trump spent enormously and exorbitantly during his 4 years. He deficit spent for 4 years. He added 2 major COVID stimulus bills. Biden had 1. Trump contributed to this as well. But this is, again, your brain on MAGA. Trump gets graded on a curve. He inherited nothing good from Obama when, in fact, he did. Everything good that happened on Trump's watch, he did it himself because he's such a big, good boy. Then the bad stuff that happened in Trump's 4th year, that doesn't count. Trump had nothing to do with that. It happened around him. He was a victim of it, really. Then Biden comes along, and all the bad stuff that he inherited from Trump, well, that is actually, not only, that is there, and that's all on Biden. COVID's actually Biden's fault. And global inflation, that's Biden's fault. See how their brain works? Incredibly hypocritical, unprincipled, deserve nothing but contempt and scorn because they can't possibly defend this stuff in good faith. So let me know what you think in the comments.